Thanks for watching Agency in Motion, a monthly program focused on operations at specific civilian or military agencies. You'll hear from the Social Security Administration this month. I'm Francis Rose with the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network. We've got a lot of ground to cover in the next 30 minutes, including how that agency is moving away from the Social Security number as an identifier, potential security benefits of that transformation, plus how SSA is collaborating with other federal offices to make it happen. Experts from SSA, Red Hat, and Hitachi Vantara Federal will join me. SSA is an agency in motion, so let's get moving. Joining me first, Rajiv Mathur, the Chief Information Officer at the Social Security Administration. Rajiv, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. How would you identify digital identity? What does that mean in the context of what you're trying to accomplish at SSA?
Hi, Francis. Well, let me say that digital identity, the official definition, of course, is that it is a unique representation of an individual. But I will tell you that the answer really depends on the following. If you're an email provider, I may have multiple identities that I may have with an email provider. I may have 20 of them. And it really depends on the risk of the service that you're trying to use. When it comes to SSA, we must have a single identity. We can't afford to have multiple identities because in order to do our mission, in order to serve the American public in the way that we are required to serve, we require a single digital identity. In the context of how we're using identity and why it's important to us, let me tell you about where we are. We touch the lives of nearly every American, whether it's the birth of a child, the death of a loved one, whether it is encountering disability or retiring from work. We touch the lives of every American. And in that regard, over 70 million customers are monthly customers of ours, or beneficiaries of some sort. People come to us from all over the country, obviously. We have thousands of employees across the nation, across 1,200 field offices, across 52 disability determination centers that are state employees, of course, that are looking for service from SSA. And our employees do a great job in delivering that service. They do it very well. And even in light in COVID, they do it great. And largely done through live field office transactions and through call centers. But our customer base, like everyone else's, is expecting something different. In other parts of their life, they have the option to go online and the option to do multiple things online, that they don't have to visit an office, or they don't have to wait in line in a call center. And that those expectations have changed and frankly have accelerated over the years, and especially in light of COVID. We've seen that behavior and that expectation change, and the need for the American public to be able to operate in a similar manner with their government that they do in the private sector. Okay. We are in the midst at SSA, in the midst of a digital transformation. We have an IT modernization plan. We published it in 2017. We're in the process of refreshing that now. And it is all about digital, but it's not about reducing service options for the public. It's not about less field offices or less call center options. It's about more service options, delivering what they need and delivering it in a way that they need it. So it's being able to do whatever you can do in a field office, do it online. Now, if you're and of course, there will be reasons why you can't do it online. You have to come to a field office. You have to talk to one of our great technicians on the front lines. But you should have the option to do it online. So in the midst of that digital transformation, we have to know that person who's coming to us is who they say they are. Peter Steiner in the 90s had a cartoon in the New Yorker about no one, you remember, I can see you saying that, right? No one knows you're a dog on the internet. Well, we need to know who you are, and you are who you say you are. So DI, digital identity, for us is a big deal. And it's a societal problem, Francis. It's not just for SSA. It's real for banks, for insurance companies, for healthcare providers, obviously for commerce companies, but especially for government agencies. So it's a big deal for us. We're excited about it, but that's where we are.
I remember that cartoon was a big deal, not just because it was funny, but because it meant the internet had arrived because it had made a New Yorker cartoon. For years, the identifier, probably since there's been a Social Security Administration, the identifier has been the Social Security number. You've spoken in public on a number of occasions about how you want to move away from that, and I think the focus has been on moving away from that and not what you want to move toward, Rajiv. What do you want to move toward, and why is that important in your view?
Well, let me first say that I would be remiss in saying that the identifier and the way that the Social Security number is used is great as an identifier, but it's not great as an authenticator. And that's the difference. Today, it's used as an authenticator. And if you know anything about how the Social Security number was formed, I mean, originally it was for an identifier, and we need a way to identify somebody when they're looking for service, whether it's us or whether it's a bank or somebody else. But over the years, from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, et cetera, the use of the SSN has changed from being an identifier to being an authenticator. And in that regard, it's not. So as long as there's a thing of value that is tied to the SSN, as long as that's the case, there's always the opportunity for malicious behavior. So it's a great record-keeping system. Going forward, we intend. Obviously, we need an identifier, and it's a great identifier as it stands today. But historically, over the last decade or so, knowledge-based authentication was the gold standard online to figure out whether or not you are who you say you are. And there's this notion of out-of-wallet questions, which is where we're asking you, who did you get a mortgage with? What kind of car? What color car did you have? What did you financed? These are quote unquote out-of-wallet questions based on data that is acquired from credit bureaus, et cetera. But that information has really been compromised. Where we are moving to are NIST standards. And the NIST standard that was published in 2017, 863.3, it really talks about evidence-based. It doesn't move away from just attribute-based, but also evidence-based. So we need you to tell us about your driver's license, to show us your driver's license. We also need to see you and prove that you verify you are who you say you are. A document, right? Some sort with authoritative source is where we need to get to. So the SSN as an identifier is great. We got to move to the next generation and a much more secure approach, which is what NIST is requiring agencies to do. And that's where we're headed, and that's where we've already started to do.
So the NSTIC effort at NIST is one effort in government to establish identity. Another one is GSA building login.gov. OMB obviously is interested in the overlay of all of these. What's this collaboration effort look like in your view? And who's talking to who, and who's engaging who on what level in all of this conversation, Rajiv?
Well, the good news is there's a lot of collaboration going on. And NSTIC was an effort that was earlier, I think 2012, 2013 or so. Since then, it's evolved into login.gov. And login.gov is somebody who we intend to work with, at the right time. We are, and one of the reasons why it was very interesting for us and for me to talk with you about identity is because where we are right now, we can't do it alone. As I mentioned, it's a societal problem. At the agency level, we all need to figure out a way to work together. We all are facing the same issues. So we're talking to GSA, talking to Login, and figuring out how we would be able to use them. Our goal is to keep the gold standard of the NIST guidelines. The gold standard in your physical world is you flash a license. With that license, you can do a lot of different things. It matches your picture with an identity. That's what NIST is trying to do with, and I'm not the authoritative source on NIST, but that's what they're trying to do. Login, us, we need to be compliant. And when one of the things we're trying to also do is what other federal agencies are out there. So this, a plug for whoever's listening today is that let's figure out a way to work together on this stuff and solve it together, both on the public sector side and on the private sector side.
Rajiv, you talked a few moments ago about how you're updating your IT modernization strategy, moving it up from updating it from the 2017 edition. And the way that you talked about it was striking to me because it comports with what I'm seeing at other agencies, and that is thinking about it. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounded like you're thinking about it not even so much as an IT modernization effort anymore as a digitization effort. That strikes me as more broadly encompassing what the agency needs to do to fulfill the President's management agenda for customer experience and all of those kinds of things. Am I hearing you right? Are people starting to think differently, and are you specifically at SSA starting to think differently about the IT implications and the digital implications of what you're doing for your customers?
That's pretty observant, Francis. I would agree with that. And if you look at the original 2017 plan, the tagline on that is that it's a business and IT journey. And note the word was business was first, business and IT journey. I want to make sure that we emphasize that because really, I've been a business guy my entire career, but as an IT guy today, business is the lead. Business needs to drive what they need, and IT needs to be a really good service provider. That holds true whether you're in the public sector or in the private sector. And so we are looking, and we continue to work pretty closely with the business. And it is a digital transformation plan. That's how we're thinking about it within SSA. Commissioner Andrew Saul, when he arrived, one of the things that he initiated was setting up a business modernization office, effectively a business office for the equivalent for IT modernization. So we work very closely with that office, but it's really agency-wide. It needs to be a agency-wide approach, which is what we're taking.
I don't mean to suggest that transformation, that adjustment was driven entirely by Vantara, but that was the point of Vantara, was to bring people like you to the table to participate in business process discussions rather than have you really only focused on information technology process discussions. And it strikes me there are implications in that business process transformation that apply at Social Security or that would apply at a federal government agency that wouldn't apply in some other organization, a private sector organization, academia, and so on. What are some of those, Rajiv? What are some of the things you have to think about as SSA through this transformation process that another organization might not have to? Security, privacy, any of those, something else?
Let me say that when you look at SSA, and whether you look at a private sector firm, an insurance company, or a bank, at the top level, we need to be customer centric. That's what we're doing. That's what we need to do. And in that regard, there's no difference. Everything that we're delivering and everything that we are engineering and trying to do better, whether it comes to more online services or even offline services, they need to be customer centric. They need to be engineered around that customer's need. And all customer needs are not the same. So we need to make sure that whatever we are delivering is focused on those customer segments, and thinking about our customers as a set of segments, and making sure that our products and services are meeting those needs. So I think in that regard, we are no different. We have to serve based on customer need. I think the big difference that I would say, one of the big differences, of course, is that the broad base of our customers, and we as a private sector firm can choose some of the customers they have. They can choose based on profitability or value, and say this customer is not someone I'm going to target because they're not worth value-wise my services. And that's not meant to be pejorative. It's a reasonable decision to make when you're in business. And that's what many companies are able to do. In our case, we need to make sure that whatever we do, and that holds true in spades for a digital identity, it serves the entire population. And every customer needs to have an option to use our services. When it's digital identity, they need to be able to use digital identity in a way that makes sense for them. And if they can't use it for whatever reason, they need to be able to come into an office or call an 800 number. They need to be able to do that. So in that regard, the diversity of our customer base, the need for us to be all-encompassing when it comes to delivering those services, and nobody gets disenfranchised. Super important. Should not be lost in anybody. So we are focused on that, meeting that mission.
You've just heard the Social Security Administration wants to reshape the digital identity landscape. It's a gutsy move that comes with a certain level of risk. Up next, some best practices for change management in risk-averse cultures. You're watching Agency in Motion, SSA, on the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network.
Agency in Motion, SSA, is brought to you in part by Red Hat. Learn more at redhat.com/gov.
Welcome back to Agency in Motion, SSA. I'm your host, Francis Rose. Agencies like the Social Security Administration and many others put a high premium on risk management. It's important to keep critical data on nearly every U.S. taxpayer safe and secure. Moving away from the Social Security number to a new form of digital identity would be transformational. It's also risky. Let's learn more about the implications for change management now. Yasser Saeed is Transformational Specialist for North America Public Sector at Red Hat. Welcome very much. Thanks for joining me today. You just heard Rajiv's plan at the Social Security Administration. What struck you? What jumped out at you in the plan that he's about to execute?
Well, first of all, it's very inspiring to hear the exciting undertaking that SSA is having. I mean, digital identity, as he said, it's going to make a big impact. And what really struck out at me is not just that it's a big undertaking, but the amount of people that are going to be affected by it. All of us are going to be affected by it, but he also talked about how there's going to be both commercial, public sector. Really, there's going to be a lot of collaboration for this to be successful. But it's very exciting and inspiring what they're looking to do.
When you have the number of people and the number of organizations that will be impacted by this in the significant way that they will be, what's the change management look like for that? There's a cultural component there. There's obviously the logistical issues, and there are strategic issues as well, probably others that I'm not thinking of. But it strikes me that that's potentially the biggest issue, is how you manage that change. What are the things to keep in mind for an organization like SSA or anybody who's trying to manage something this big?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of moving parts to this, and that's something at Red Hat that we work with a lot of agencies on this type of an effort. And I would say probably the biggest thing, really, when you talk about digital transformation, it's not about the technology. Technology is important, but in the end of the day, it's about culture, it's about behavior change, it's about habits and values. So one way I like to kind of talk about this. So a question for you, Francis: what percentage of New Year's resolutions fail by mid-February?
Mine, 100%.
Not too far off. All of us are there with you. It's about 80%. The point being that just like we have personal transformations, 80% of them don't basically fail by February. 80% of digital transformations fail to give the value. And one of the main reasons is exactly that: it's about culture. I can buy the membership to the gym, but if I don't change my culture, my behavior, my habits, then I'm not going to make the resolutions that I made. So that's one of the key things that is, I wouldn't say is often overlooked. Increasingly, you see agencies understand that that's one of the most important things, but that's actually really the heart of it. And that's one thing everyone has to keep in mind.
It's the best way to get buy-in on that cultural and behavioral change. Of all of the things that you mentioned, I think the behavioral change, the habits, are probably the hardest, because, as you said, I might say to myself, I really need to do this, but if I don't actually make myself do it, I haven't changed anything.
Exactly, and that's where leadership is so critical. So one of the things that we're hearing about more and more, and for the folks at home that might have heard about, is organizational empathy. One of the key things is leadership, of course, has to have a strategic roadmap. And among those things that has to be communicated in there is actually organizational empathy. Leadership, how they message, how they communicate, and how they collaborate will have a big impact on how the transformation efforts are actually received. It's a pivotal point where you can actually get people fired up for the transformation if they understand the mission of it. Where is it going and what's in it for them? If it's not done right, it can actually cause a lot of disharmony within an organization. So from a leadership perspective, the way that you communicate, the way that you create an atmosphere of organizational empathy, psychological safety, as they like to say. This might sound like squishy stuff, but there are many studies how this actually can make very big impact from an organizational's digital transformation efforts.
Yes, sir. Are those techniques enough to overcome the risk aversion of an organization like a federal government agency?
It's funny, we were talking to a federal agency just the other day, and they said, our risk aversion gets in the way of us being able to change. Our risk is actually one of the challenges, but we're trying to get across the risk, but it's kind of like, how do you break out of that risk loop? So that's a big challenge. One of the ways that we've seen really effective there is organizations can actually do quick wins. They can build upon the successes that they had. Build it, and again, part of this is changing the culture, that it's okay if things don't work out perfectly at the beginning. It's a learning process. From a personal perspective, because it's always kind of helpful to look at it from a personal perspective. If I didn't go to the gym, let's say, I don't beat myself up. I take that as a growth opportunity. I learn from it, and then I try to get better. So that's a really important way to help to deal with risk.
We just have a couple of minutes left. Yasser, what does the strategic map look like for an organization like SSA that's undertaking the kind of transformation that they're undertaking, and who all's voices should be heard in the construction of that strategic plan?
Yeah, and as Rajiv said, it's a really important point you're bringing up here, because again, first of all, from a strategic roadmap perspective, as we talked about, culture, behavior change, and strategies to be able to deal with that. But then you got to get the right stakeholders involved, and that's internal, starting with leadership, product management, operations, developers, architecture, mission people, and of course security, because as he talked about, security in the federal space is so important. Then it has to expand to others as well, which is citizens, business, trade, other agencies as well. So there's a lot of different moving parts of this internally, and then there's a lot externally. And having a roadmap that is inclusive of all of those key stakeholders, and each one you may approach a bit differently. In the end of the day, what you want is you want each one to understand how this digital transformation, what is in it for them, and how is it going to improve their life. By doing that and doing it in an empathetic way, you can actually get buy-in, which actually pushes forward the chances for success.
Yasser Saeed of Red Hat, terrific conversation. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So far, you've learned more about one of SSA's top priorities for digital identity and how it could impact their digital transformation overall, plus where risk fits into that narrative. Up next, we talk data center planning for agencies like SSA. You're watching Agency in Motion on the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network.
Agency in Motion, SSA, is brought to you in part by Hitachi Vantara Federal. Learn more at HitachiVantaraFederal.com.
As data centers increase in size and sophistication, a number of federal agencies are looking at artificial intelligence and machine learning to get more value out of the data itself. Let's learn more about that now. Gary Hicks is Chief Technology Officer at Hitachi Vantara Federal. Gary, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. Data centers are becoming more and more complex, more and more sophisticated, and bigger on an ongoing basis. Is there a role for artificial intelligence and machine learning to help technology pros kind of stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, I definitely think so, Francis. If you look at the technologies that have continued to evolve and mature in the data centers, they've become much more efficient at not only managing the infrastructure, but automating that infrastructure. And when you look at all the years of experience that industry has in data around break fix, mechanisms to improve the environments, they've taken all that logic and bundled it into these new tools and processes that allow people to actually implement AI and machine learning to improve the efficiency of the data center, be more predictive about, hey, this device is getting ready to break. Hey, do you want to provision this storage automatically to this customer just using a single button click, knowing what's going to happen or not happen as they go through that. And it allows the ability to remove the element of human error as much as possible.
The Social Security Administration has one big procurement underway. They have another one coming in the near future. What should an organization like that, with projects happening and in the pipeline, what should they be thinking about as they're building on a kind of a long-term data center plan?
Yeah, I think it's looking really at what technologies out there in the marketplace or my incumbent technologies, features and tools they can offer to improve the efficiency of the data center. We have still have a lot of stranded IT and siloed data and storage and compute power out there in our data centers. What tools can industry bring to improve that efficiency and move my data center into the future where I can improve things like data protection technologies or use predictive analytics to tell me, hey, this infrastructure is becoming more aged, or we can optimize it through that type of machine learning.
I want to pull back just briefly for a moment because there's been this transition. A lot of agencies thinking about cloud transitions and moving away from data centers. And help me understand the role of the data center in 2020 and beyond, where it makes sense for agencies to continue to count data centers as part of their infrastructure, as part of their architecture.
I think there's a great opportunity for them to look at all the workloads that exist in their data center and make a decision of whether it needs to be on-prem. There's a lot of digital identity and security things that we've seen from SSA, the CIO mentioned earlier, that identify that may not be a good candidate for a cloud migration or hosting in the public cloud. So a private cloud infrastructure or a data center, as most customers will look at it, is still relevant in their IT strategy moving forward. But you have to do that workload alignment to determine where it should live from a security and operational efficiency and a cost perspective as well.
That's exactly what Suzette Kent was getting at when she shifted from kind of using the term data center consolidation to data center optimization. It strikes me that optimization is kind of the key of what you're getting at. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's people getting outside the comfort zones, because a lot of these new tools are really great at improving that efficiencies, but people are comfortable with especially in this time of COVID, they're risk adverse. So a lot of people have the mentality, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But you have to look at the opportunities for improvement of your environment and making it more efficient and moving it into the next kind of generation of your data center and data strategy.
Gary, what should agencies be thinking about technologically, innovation-wise, or whatever, as they're thinking about optimization, as they're thinking about modernization, given the fact that their data sets, the amount of data they're collecting, continues to just grow exponentially year after year after year? What kind of headroom do they have to allow themselves as they're building these strategies?
I think they have to kind of continue with that, having enough room to grow, but I think we need to get better at cataloging our data and using tools that can index and search and classify that data. So when the time does come to do housekeeping or cloud tiering, we have a good handle on that data out there and what can move out. Let's understand what's FOUO and probably can't be hosted up on the public cloud. What has personally identifiable information that may be a challenge to, it's really continuing to leverage these tools that industry is bringing to bear that allow them to catalog that data and understand its unique value to the agency and the mission.
What else should agencies be asking you that maybe they're not now as they're coming to you to have these conversations?
I think they should be asking of kind of what is our data quality and where do we start? And I think a lot of them need to challenge kind of the status quo where, we've always done it this way, but let's evaluate, is it still the right way to do it? And let's look at industry. Are there other tools out there in the industry that can help us improve our position as a service provider to the agency and meet that mission?
Gary Hicks, thanks very much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
And thank you for watching Agency in Motion, SSA, the 5th episode of a new monthly series focused on the information technology and other operations at specific civilian or military agencies. Our next episode features NASA. You can get more information on the subject matter we discussed today at govmatters.tv/AIM. For the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network, I'm Francis Rose.